And this is video number 2. And when it comes to MMA, it always feels like every couple of days I've got something to talk about when it comes to that. It's kind of hard sometimes to do videos because you have to keep up, but I need to be a little more adamant with this. So, John Jones wins the UFC light heavyweight title, beats Mauricio Shogun Hua, and the inevitable happens. A teammate has to fight a teammate. And there was a lot of talk about this on the internet among MMA fans and among the MMA community as a whole about this matter. And Evans didn't seem open to the idea, nor did John Jones. And now they have both agreed to do the fight. And since then, there seems to be some tension. I don't know if it's more between the two fighters or if it's between the camps, because Rashad Evans did an interview after the Shogun Jones fight where he was very, I'm done with Greg Jackson, I'm done with that camp, I'm finished with them, I'm finished with them. And then more information came out via Rashad Evans' Twitter where he was talked about how he was not 100% behind the idea of bringing John Jones into the camp. And in a way, he's almost coming off as feeling like he's been cast aside for John Jones. And that was one of the reasons why he didn't want to do it. Now, Greg Jackson has come out and said reportedly that Evans did agree to have Jones in the camp. He didn't disagree, he agreed to have it. And he said that had Evans said, I can't do this, I don't want to agree with this, he would not have gone against Rashad Evans' wishes. So, in a way, it just seems like there's a lot of confusion and communication problems there between people in that camp. And from what I've heard now, Rashad has left that camp officially, and I believe he's in a camp, a similar camp to Antonio. I think he's in the same camp as Antonio Bigfoot Silva. I know he trains with King Mo Lawal, and I know he might be doing some of his training at the Grudge Pit with Trevor Whitman. So I think that's where he'll probably be spending some of his time too. But it looks like he's definitely out of the Jackson camp for now. The thing that I find interesting about all of that is that the odds on the fight are very interesting. It looks like to me that John Jones is the heavy favourite to win the fight. And based on his performances, I mean, I won't blame people for favouring him. But here's the thing that and this is coming from someone that's competed in sports. When you train in a camp with people, you have a better idea of what their strengths and weaknesses are because you're training and sparring with them and you know what things to do with them, and you've got more of an inside look than anybody else when you're in a camp with someone. There are probably people in camp that could tell you what St. Pierre's weaknesses are because they've sparred and trained with him and they know them better than anybody else. And I guess, I almost liken this to Machida and Shogun Hua. When that fight was announced, I knew Shogun was going to beat him. And my logic was, and people overlooked this, even though Machida was on this tremendous roll and people thought he was untouchable, Shogun had been in camp with Machida and trained and sparred with him. So I knew that he would have that advantage, and I knew he'd be able to use that advantage more so than anyone else. And I think that's also a good thing because when you're a guy outside of the camp, let's say let's say Evans wasn't fighting John Jones, and maybe it was someone like Tito Ortiz. God forbid that fight ever happens. The John Jones aura and the John Jones hype, if you will, is so big and so great that it's gonna catch up with someone outside of the camp mentally. Whereas Evans won't actually have to deal with all of that because he's been in camp with him, he's sparred with him, and he will have a lot more confidence coming into a fight and knowing what he can do with him. So for me personally, based on that, it's more of an even fight than what people believe. And I wouldn't be surprised if Evans is actually able to do some kind of damage to him and even win. I wouldn't be surprised if that happened. because he's been in a camp with him and he knows what he's got to such an extent. um, as far as the things that are being said, I believe there's some realness to it, but I wouldn't be surprised if, money talks and they all agreed to kind of do something about this and kind of talk it up a little bit. So some of it is fight selling, and I believe some of it is very real. Um, Other things I wanted to talk about. I saw the first episode of The Ultimate Fighter. I really enjoyed it. It'll be interesting to see how Brock Lesnar comes across as the weeks go by. Junior Dos Santos strikes me as a very warm, friendly, and open person, and I think he's going to come off as a hero actually by the time the season's ended, and a bigger draw than what he was before because of it. And I think Brock actually hasn't come off as so bad so far. He seems like, quite normal as opposed to the guy that goes crazy and headbutts the screen and spits his mouthpiece out and tells people he's going to jump on his Playboy model wife. So it'll be very interesting to see what they do there. Speaking of the Ultimate Fighter, actually, and while we're on the subject of that, there's been a lot of talk about who's going to coach the next season of the Ultimate Fighter, and a lot of people thought and believed it would be Uriah Faber and Dominic Cruz, and I believe that would have been a great way to introduce those WEC fighters to the public. And it doesn't look like that's going to happen, but they are going to fight each other. But based on the demand from fans, I wouldn't be surprised if Michael Bisping and Chael Sonnen are opposing coaches for this year's Ultimate Fighter. And if they do that, that would be a very, very interesting season to say the least. There's already look at how Chael talks. He's such a polarizing character that it would make for tremendous television. And Michael Bisping is, a very polarizing person, so it would make for interesting TV. It wouldn't be like Henderson and Bisping, where no disrespect to Dan Henderson, we knew he wasn't going to get into it with Michael verbally. So in a way, some of the appeal of that season was taken away. But now you have two guys that will talk about each other, and Bisping will, and Chael will. And Chael will say whatever he wants to and be very unrepentant about that. It would make for a great season. So I'm going to put this right out there now. If the UFC ever see this video, I want to say this, and I want to put this idea right now. Chael Sonnen, Michael Bisping, coaches for the Ultimate Fighter, the main event of a show in the UK, the semi-main event, Dan Hardy and Josh Koscheck. I'll tell you right now, that would be so much heat in the audience for those two fights. It would be two big fights for fans in the UK and two significant fights, based on the words that have already been said between Sonnen and Bisping. And let's not forget what Koscheck was saying about Hardy and the things they've said about each other in interviews, that you'd have two big fights to build, and I think you'd have great reactions from the crowd in England. So please, guys, let's bombard Dana White's Twitter with this idea. Uh, anyways, other things I want to talk about. I watched the Ultimate Fight Night. I think actually now that you have two guys you could build as contenders for the welterweight belt, um, for depending on who wins between Shields and St. Pierre, Anthony Johnson, if he can get a few more wins behind him, then perhaps that could be a guy they can build for a title fight. Carlos Condit is another one. Apparently John Fitch is injured, and Condit said he wants that fight with BJ Penn. I'd love to see that. So, fingers crossed that happens. I want to say I was really impressed with the UFC video package that they did for Jake Shields and George St. Pierre. Didn't need to go into great detail. It explained who they were in the space of a minute and a half and already pumped people up for that fight. So, tremendous what a video package can do for your ticket sales. Also in that card, a fight that's probably been overlooked is Randy Couture and Lyoto Machida, and I'll be very, 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 very interested to see that. It's a fight Randy has wanted for about 2 years. He's been on interviews such as Karen Bryant and said that's a fight he wants to have. He wants to solve that puzzle. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with Machida, as he's got 2 losses in a row, and what happens with him if he gets a third loss. I don't know if he'll be cut. I doubt it, but it will be interesting to see what they do with him next. And another fight they announced is Ryan Bader versus Ortiz, and while I am a fan of Ortiz, I do kind of wonder where he is at physically and skill wise. And I feel that if he had a hard time with Matt Hamill, I think he's going to have an even harder time with Ryan Bader. But you never know with MMA. I could be wrong, but I don't see him. I don't know if I could ever see him winning a world title ever again. But who knows? You never say never in this game. Anyways, guys, that's it. That's me droning on and on and on and on and on. I hope you can make some sense of what I'm saying. It's pretty late out here. And don't forget, we need to bombard Facebook, Dana White's Twitter, anything UFC related. Chael Sonnen and Bisping as coaches as the Ultimate Fighter. Anyways, guys, take care. Bye.